from Porsche to ones with a diesel engine. And all the way on to the latest in car sound systems, not to mention the weirdest, wackiest Aston Martin you have ever seen. It's all here on Inside Line. Now, I've never been a massive fan of the Cayenne. Sure, it's got a Porsche badge and it goes pretty quick, but it just doesn't feel like a Porsche. And Jez, now they've gone and thrown a diesel engine in this thing. Does it work?
Well, I guess building tractors didn't do Lamborghini any harm, but seriously, I think building the Cayenne in the first place was the most controversial thing that Porsche did. A diesel, well, kind of inevitable, really.
You've driven the car. How do you make a diesel engine feel like a Porsche? How do you get the performance there?
Well, it's mainly from the torque, which is unusual. I mean, most Porsches obviously are all about kilowatts, but this car is very much about torque. It's got 550 newton meters. Yeah, that's a pretty hefty amount.
Bit of a problem though in terms of credibility. That thing is straight from Volkswagen. Why are Porsche owners going to buy these things?
Well, I think from the purist point of view, I don't think this is the kind of car that would appeal to them. So I think what's under the bonnet is not necessarily going to be such an issue for the people that would buy this car.
I guess one of the big things is fuel economy, and one of the big markets for this is mums. And I reckon, Jez, you and I aren't much of a chance of becoming a mum, but Jodine, you might get there one day. Would you buy this car?
Look, I can see where they're coming from. They wanted something that mothers would be able to carry their kids around in. Obviously, some of the two-seaters aren't quite going to do the trick. However, for me, I think a Porsche really needs to be a Porsche, and the Cayenne, just being a big four-wheel drive, doesn't quite get that mark.
As for a diesel, well, I don't know. Yeah, you can save some money on fuel, but for me, a Porsche has got to be the real deal. And speaking of which, I've just been to Europe and driven one. The Panamera, the first four-door from Porsche. It is an absolute cracker. Let's have a look. The Panamera is the first ever Porsche four-door sports car, and it's actually not that small. It's longer than a Ford Falcon and a Holden Commodore, even a Toyota Land Cruiser. But for that, you get plenty of room in the back. It's actually a really surprisingly spacious four-seater. But they've also tried to keep that Porsche look in this car, and I'm not quite sure whether it works. It sort of looks like a squashed and lengthened 911. But in true Porsche fashion, it drives brilliantly. It's actually surprisingly comfortable in the ride, really soaks up the bumps well, and of course potent around corners. And one of the great things is that awesome sounding V8 engine. And the launch control, well, it's a brilliant way to get whiplash. They have certainly nailed it in the way it drives and the way it feels. Don't quite know about the looks, but that's for another time. Now, speaking of nailing it, one thing the Panamera has done brilliantly is the optional sound system. It's from a company called Burmester. Sells for about $9,000 on top of the standard one, and it is an absolute cracker. The sound quality is unbelievable. Now, Jay, what do you reckon some of the best sound systems you've heard in cars are?
I'd probably have to say the Chrysler system's pretty good. I think it's called Infinity, yeah. And I reckon that the Mark Levinson stereo that you hear in the Lexuses, that's also pretty good.
Jezza, what do you reckon?
Well, call me biased, but I've got to say one of the audio systems I've been most impressed with lately is the Bowers & Wilkins system in the Jaguar XF.
Oh, very surprising of you to be so pommy-focused. But anyway, look, I'll tell you what, seriously, forget any of them, because this thing is an absolute game changer. The clarity from it, the sound quality from it, and the bass from it is just phenomenal. It dead set made my hair shake. You sort of almost get sick from the bass pumping into your back. It is, it's absolutely incredible.
Wow.
As I said, $9,000. It is the best $9,000 you will ever spend on a car, worth every cent, big time.
But Toby, I've got to say, if I was driving the Porsche Panamera, I think I'd want to be turning the sound system off and listening to the soundtrack coming from under the bonnet.
Yeah, I must admit, the soundtrack coming from the bonnet's pretty good, but the stuff coming from the sound system's even better. And look, car sound systems these days, I think they're getting a lot more important than they were. They're getting a lot more, people take a lot more notice of that sort of stuff. And you're starting to see a lot of the name brands. Bose, for example. Bose does some fantastic systems in cars. One of the things I think they're sort of maybe spreading their brand a little bit too much these days. Some of the ones in Mazdas and Nissans I don't think are that great. They sort of sound a little bit sus, but they're loud, but they're not that brilliant on sound quality. But, I think there are a lot of cars that don't sound as good as a Panamera. and I would put a Jaguar XF diesel in that category, Jez. But you know, and I really appreciate decent sound. There's a lot of time you're in traffic, you can't really sense that sort of that engine sound, so you know, may as well crank it up and listen to a good tune.
Well, that depends on the quality of the music, of course, and I've seen what's on your iPod.
Well, speaking of things that sound a bit weird, Jez, how about this? Speaking of English cars as well, a hatchback version of an Aston Martin. Now, Jay, you've looked into this a bit this week. What is going on here?
Well, basically, Aston Martin are offering any of their owners a 3-door hatchback, but the catch is, A, you have to actually own one or be actually buying one, but also it's built on a Toyota. It's basically a $20,000 car with an Aston Martin badge.
So, Jez, James Bond, how the hell is he going to get away from the baddies? How's he going to go cranking down a mountain pass in Italy in a Toyota hatchback with a different grille on the front?
He's going to be losing some credibility with the baddies here for sure. It's I thought this was an April Fool's joke, you know, when I first saw this. But I think if you look into it deeper, I think what's really behind this is CO2 emissions, and this is Aston's response to lower their average fleet emissions to avoid these impending financial penalties that are coming up in the European Union.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I mean, the big thing with all this stuff, all car makers are trying to get their fuel consumption down, and particularly their carbon dioxide emissions down. It's a real issue in Europe. So one of the things they need to do is get their entire fleet to use less fuel. Build a small car, perfect way to do it. So you're probably right, it actually makes a lot of sense, but I'm not sure whether this is the right thing for a brand like Aston Martin. I mean, let's face it, they do some of the sexiest cars in the world. That is not a sexy car.
No, it's not. But I think for them also the other side of it is when their customers have children, obviously they're losing a lot of those people to other brands. They want to keep people within the brand, so why not give them a little city runabout for their kids to drive around in rather than you know, a 1 Series or something like that. So I guess in that sense, yeah, they managed to keep people in the brand, but as for it being sporty, no, I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I've got no doubt that people will want to buy one. After all, it's an Aston Martin. Tell your mate you drive an Aston Martin.
Yeah, exactly.
Just don't let them look at it, for God's sake.
Sounds like a product extension too far for me.
Yeah, it does. I don't know. I don't think it's working. I think it's too weird, too wacky. But there you go. I'm sure it'll sell. Well, there's no doubt that is one of the wildest things I've seen in the car world for quite a while. It's right up there with a diesel-powered version of a Porsche. Anyway, that's it for this week on Inside Line. So until next time, stay tuned to Drive.com.au for all the latest motoring news and reviews.